1947 is set in a world very much like ours. In fact, until the middle years of World War II, its history is nearly indistinguishable from our own. However, in 1943, the order of the world changed with the development of atomic weapons. The testing and use of these weapons set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the nature of the conflict and directly lead to the situation detailed herein. In 1943, the U.S. Manhattan Program under Robert Oppenheimer made rapid progress in developing the joint Canadian-British atomic energy program into a weapon that could hopefully win them the war. The testing of a prototype device at the Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico yielded a workable weapon in early 1944. It also, however, produced a side effect that changed history forever. At the test site, a rift in the fabric of space formed at the heart of the detonation. This rift stabilized over a matter of days and remains in place nearly 4 years later. Before the impact or relevance of the rift was fully understood, the U.S. moved to end the war early, threatening Germany with an atomic attack in an effort to forestall the need for an invasion of Europe. German intransigence forced President Roosevelt's hand, and the Fat Boy atomic bomb was dropped on Dresden on the 12th of March, 1944. Despite this, Hitler refused to yield, and without further devices or the desire to use them, the Allies continued planning Operation Overlord. The Dresden detonation created another rift, and its existence was identified by German scientists more quickly than their U.S. counterparts, studying the after effects of the atomic weapon. Both the U.S. and Germany then began to receive unidentifiable signals through the rifts, mostly transmitted at radio frequencies, detectable by existing equipment, but often undecipherable or hopelessly corrupted. After several weeks, it became apparent that the communications were exactly that, messages from unknown originators that appeared to want to help each nation's war efforts. The U.S. approached this situation with caution, but rapidly assembled its greatest minds at the Los Alamos labs, securing the facility behind the strongest barriers and renaming it Area 51 to hide its origin and true purpose. In Germany, less caution was exercised. Hitler, excited by the seemingly occult nature of the phenomenon, insisted on pushing the limits of safety to understand what was happening, declaring Dresden a military-only zone. Radiation-proof bunkers were immediately constructed in the vicinity, allowing regular access to the rift site at the center of the former city. The bunkers quickly formed the heart of a research and industrial facility looking to exploit the rift technology, or rift tech, to aid the war effort. Slowly, the messages were pieced together. Much was unclear and beyond comprehension, but every so often a scientific principle or theory was deciphered that allowed each nation to make huge leaps in industrial and scientific research. Each side was unaware of the other's progress, or even the existence of the parallel rifts. Had they been, They would have quickly determined the nature of the messages differed, and the technology hinted at varied. They would have found similarities, too. No messages sent back into the rift were ever answered, and the identities of the senders remains a mystery. Despite repeated pleas and demands from the other Allied governments, Roosevelt and the U.S. were reluctant to share the messages coming from the rift in New Mexico. Hitler was having similar debates with the Japanese High Command, who demanded full access, with his allies in a perilous position. Hitler made the decision to share much of the discovered rift tech. After a number of angry exchanges, Stalin declared the U.S. an enemy of the motherland in May 1944, declaring that the Soviet Union would end the war and that the U.S. had no further role to play in mainland Europe. Churchill and the British were forced to choose sides, although it was not a hard decision to make. The Allies fractured in two, with the US, Britain, and Canada now working at odds with the Soviet Union. Top secret rift energy. The exotic particles emitted by the rifts are, paradoxically, both powerful and limited. They are unquestioningly potent, exhibiting a notable effect on organic tissue and paving the way to several biological applications. They also exhibit interesting effects on lithium, iron, and silicon that enable the creation of very effective electrical circuits and greatly accelerated research into computational processing technology. However, the rift signals are strangely silent on applications of rift energy as either a power source or a deployable weapon. Currently, harnessing rift energy is a complex and laboratory-led process requiring careful environmental control and exacting conditions. As a direct energy source, it is ill-suited to the chaos of the battlefield. Despite this, all nations seeking to exploit the cutting edge of rift technology are pursuing programs to unravel the potential energy within rift particles. How successful they will ultimately be remains to be seen. Western Europe, June 1944. On 6th of June 1944, the Allies launch Operation Overlord, the invasion of mainland Europe, through the Normandy beaches. Initial successes lead to the establishment of a beachhead focused on Cannes and the Carentan Peninsula. In late July, U.S. forces prepare Operation Cobra to break out of the stalemate, and British and Canadian troops continue to slug it out with German forces around Cannes. The Germans, however, deploy the first of the technology they had gleaned from the rift, and after the success of the Allied landings, Allied High Command is ill prepared for a strong German counterattack. July 1944. Operation Cobra launches on the 25th of June, shortly after the British began Operation Goodwood on the 18th of July to fix the German defenders around Cannes. After a slow beginning, the operations gain traction, and German defenders start to lose cohesion. On the 18th of July, the U.S. achieve a breakthrough and prepare to exploit the gap they fought hard to create. The German High Command, likely Hitler himself, orders the release of their new secret weapon, the Dead Core. Overnight, the Allied forces begin to fall back in disarray. Reports from the front speak of corpses and zombies attacking the Allied troops from the darkness. Shock, fear, and horror break the resolve of the U.S. spearhead forces, and by early August, any chance to exploit the breakthrough has been lost. August through December 1944. For more than 2 weeks, Allied forces in France fight to stabilize the front line against the horrors that Germany throws at them. Animated corpses test the Allies' steel and resolve, but shock and fear give way to grim determination, and the front lines are re-established. In the Allies' favor is Germany's inability to sustain the manufacture of their creations. Despite their success, the use of the Totenkorps has an adverse effect on many German units. For the next couple of months, an uneasy standoff ensues, the Allies gradually advancing eastwards, and the Germans hastily improvise defenses and fight for every mile they surrender. By December, the Allies push the Germans back to the Belgian-German border, and most of the way across France. After the impact the first rift tech has on the battlefield, neither side is under any illusion of the importance of exploiting the material they are receiving. The U.S. step up their efforts and bring in many leading British scientists in an effort to beat the Axis powers in this new arms race. Unfortunately for the U.S., at least one of the British scientists, Arthur Clifton, is also spying for the Soviets. January through March 1945. The Germans launch Operation Watch on the Rhine through the Ardennes forest, convinced a surprise will allow them to split the U.S. and British armies and drive a wedge through to the Atlantic Ocean to restrict the increasingly significant logistical operations of the Allied rear. The Battle of the Bulge, as it becomes known, is hugely successful, throwing untested U.S. units into panic as dealing with 2 new German weapons in addition to battle-hardened German infantry and tanks. The use of free-roaming Spinne light panzer mechs and the horror of Schreckwaffen hunters send some units fleeing to the rear before they even see the other German forces. Despite efforts and the use of seasoned but tired units hastily called back to the front line, desperate efforts and the use of seasoned but tired units hastily called back to the front line eventually stabilized the front lines and prevent a German link to the Atlantic coast, but not before they have reached the outskirts of Brussels. The Allies are in shock, and the Germans are able to regroup and reinforce across the Western Theater. April through May 1945. Operation Newport is launched by the Allies to regain the territory lost in the previous months. The U.S. deploys its first Tesla cannon-armed Shermans. And infantry assaults are spearheaded by heavily armored infantry. The results are impressive, but overconfidence in the new technology means that the best tactical use is squandered, and the Germans make the Allies pay for retaking the north of France and Belgium. Encircled in Brussels, 3 divisions of the German 7th and 5th Armies refuse to surrender, following Hitler's demands that they hold until relieved. The battle for Brussels begins. June through July, 1945. With troops on the Western Front exhausted after almost 5 months of heavy fighting, Hitler surprises the Allies again by striking south at the under-resourced Allied forces in Italy. The The combination of Spinne and Schreckwolfen in rough terrain again proves decisive. A rapid series of victories leads to the recapture of Rome and the installation of a puppet regime loyal to Germany. Allied reinforcements arrive from the south through the Mediterranean ports, but the Germans and their revitalized Italian allies have time to reoccupy and repair the formidable Gustav Line fortifications across the breadth of the country. Faced with advancing northwards into these defenses, the Allied armies demand the levels of supplies enjoyed in northern France before attacking. The whole theater becomes mired in politics and indecision, as neither the British or U.S. commanders wish to lead the assault north. This situation is taken advantage of by the Axis powers to relocate industrial capacity into northern Italy. Italy finds itself split, with a pro-Axis regime and military supporting the Germans in the north, whilst the liberated south reorganizes and provides military contribution to the Allied efforts. August 1945. The battle for Brussels finally ends after 2 months of bitter urban fighting. The use of U.S. Coyote light walkers and its British Guardian variant is a deciding factor towards the end of the conflict. The U.S. Grizzly makes its combat debut in small numbers and proves highly effective in the confines of the city. October through November 1945. With the rear area now secure, the Allies turn their attention to the east and begin pushing towards Germany. Friction between Baden and Montgomery continues to impact the Allies, and Eisenhower is forced to mediate again and again, to the detriment of concerted action on the ground. Variants of the Grizzly, the Bruin and Kodiak, are deployed to good effect, but the gains they make in the day are often countered by the terror inflicted on U.S. troops at night. The pinnacle of the German super soldier program, the Nachtjäger, is unleashed wherever the fighting is fiercest. Morale of U.S. forces is low, facing night after night of terrifying attacks by these soldiers. February through March 1946. With much media hype and sensationalism, the U.S. unveils the Paragon Trooper in response to the German super soldier program. With a mission to hunt the Nachtjäger, the troopers restore much-needed morale in the force, even if their achievements are less significant than the press would have the public believe. A more modest tone is adopted by the British government and press regarding the first deployment of the Galahad armored infantry, which have an immediate effect on the Commonwealth's forces' morale. Allied forces finally reach the Rhine and stand at the gates of Germany itself. As preparations for the final assault begin, the bitter air campaign is waged for air superiority. German jet fighters are unleashed in numbers thought impossible and inflict a heavy toll on Allied aircraft. For 2 months, the air war continues as the weather permits, and although the Allies eventually consider themselves the victors, the losses suffered and resurgence of the Luftwaffe will make future operations much more dangerous. April 1946. Operation Grenade is launched by the U.S. under General Patton in an attempt to force the Rhine in the south and strike up into the heartlands of Germany. After the largest artillery barrage of the war in the west thus far, U.S. troops attempt to lay bridges under fierce German resistance. Although a number of bridges are created, German counterattacks and commando raids behind U.S. lines eventually stall and then end the operation. U.S. troops enter Germany, but they do not gain a foothold. The first appearance of the German heavy panzer mechs causes havoc in the media. An apparently lone Zeus panzer mech defending one edge of a bridge held up an entire U.S. armored regiment for 12 hours. Talk of quote-unquote unbeatable German panzer mechs spreads across the globe, despite the fact the incident was a combination of luck, poor tactics, and ideal defensive terrain. May through June 1946. With the U.S. reorganizing to the south, the British under Montgomery make their attempt to force the Rhine under Operation Redwood. Commandos and the SAS strike German command posts in the hours before the assault. Hundreds of boats and pontoons begin to cross the Rhine in the early hours of 12 May. German defenders, bereft of command, fight stoically but fail to coordinate across the breadth of the attack, and by the morning, the British have footholds in several places on the German side of the Rhine. These pockets are gradually enlarged on the 13th of May, but crossing the river still proves a difficult ordeal as German artillery fights a masterful campaign, dodging Allied air attacks while maintaining fire on the river. As German command elements regain control of their forces, the reserve of Thor and Zeus panzermechs again proves decisive. Delivered where they are needed through the heroics of the Luftwaffe, the panzermechs dislodge foothold after foothold along the river. By the 15th of May, the British are back on their side of the Rhine. Their chance of seizing the initiative and gaining ground in the race with the U.S. is lost. July through August 1946. The Germans are now exhausted, and in a desperate gamble, launch a series of small but well-resourced raids across the Rhine into the Allied rear. Under the command of Colonel Otto Skorzeny, these raids are an attempt to delay Allied reorganization efforts long enough for the Wehrmacht to regroup and rearm. The stories of these raids become legend in both Germany and around the world. Small teams of commandos, often in Allied uniforms, would conduct outrageous attacks against Allied HQs, logistics hubs, and supply routes. The German press dubbed the period the Summer of Heroes, likening the commandos to Greek and Roman warriors of legend. Skorzeny becomes the nemesis of the Allies. General Patton goes so far as to assemble a special task force to hunt him down. October 1946. As both sides emerge from the summer of fighting across the Rhine, it is Germany that seizes the initiative and attacks suddenly on three fronts to grab beachheads on the Allied side of the Rhine. Specially prepared Thor panzermechs wade the Rhine to the shock of the Allied defenders and circumnavigate the prepared defenses to send the Allied defenders reeling backwards away from the river. 3 weeks of heavy fighting see the Germans gain ground and secure a decisive bridgehead across the Rhine. An armored attack from this bridgehead pushes the British north and west into Belgium. German momentum then begins to fail, partly due to lengthening supply lines, but also due to increasingly bad weather. November 1946 to February 1947. With Europe suffering the worst winter in memory, military activity slows to a crawl. Air operations struggle to have any impact, and and the Germans take advantage of the weather to consolidate their positions. At night, German and American super soldiers conduct their own war within a war. All sides use the respite to develop increasingly sophisticated weaponry and restore the fighting strength of their forces. March 1947. This is now.